I always believed that space was a desert, an infinite void where everything was lost. Heat, sound, time, even memory. There is no solid ground in space, no reliable landmarks, only the stars, distant and indifferent. And for generations, we followed our own invisible map, trusting that even without roads or borders we would always find our way back. But I was wrong. Space is not a desert. Space is an ocean. And like any ocean, it has its invisible currents, its treacherous whirlpools, and sometimes, just sometimes, it has something more, something that shouldn't be there. I know this because my crew and I found a beacon, or perhaps it found us. It was an insignificant failure, a minor navigation error, the kind of thing that happens all the time on long-haul commercial routes. The hyperluminal jump threw us slightly off course. Not enough to trigger alarms, just a deviation we would need to correct before the next waypoint. We were in safe territory, or at least that's what we thought until we saw the green light. I remember exactly the first time I saw it. The space around us was black and lifeless, the glow of ancient stars so faint they seemed more like echoes of the past than sources of light. And in the middle of that void it pulsed, a sickly green glow appearing and disappearing at irregular intervals, faint enough to look like an error on the display, strong enough to make it clear that it wasn't. Kellen was the first to speak. "Is that a signal?" None of us knew how to answer right away. There were no transmissions associated with that point. No communication signals, no radio frequencies, no recognized codes, just that light. If we had any sense of self-preservation, we would have ignored it, adjusted course, and moved on. But curiosity is a curse every traveler carries. If something strange appears in the void, you have to know what it is. That's how we made the mistake. We approached slowly, and then we saw it for the first time. A tower of corroded metal, slender and ghostly, rising from a rock that floated in the nothingness. An asteroid, a natural satellite, hard to say, but there it was. An impossible artifact in a place where nothing should exist. The green light emanated from its top, flickering like the beat of a sick heart. We had found a beacon, but a beacon needs a keeper. And he was there. At first we thought he was a corpse. The skeletal figure lay atop a pile of debris, motionless, the rags covering his body seeming like an extension of the rock itself, consumed by time. But then he moved. Slowly. His head lifted, and beneath the shadow of his improvised hood, he smiled. "Visitors." The word escaped his cracked lips like a whisper, and for a moment space itself seemed to respond. The silence that followed was absolute. None of us dared to speak. But Kellen, the youngest in the crew, was always the boldest. She stepped off the ship before we could stop her, her footsteps echoing metallically on the uneven surface of the rock. If there was hesitation in her mind, she didn't show it. She stood before the thin, shadowy figure, staring into those black eyes, deep as holes carved into the fabric of time itself. "Who are you?" she asked. His smile widened. Or maybe it was just the shadows shifting across his face. "I am the Keeper. I always have been. I always will be." There was something wrong with his voice. Something far too wrong. It wasn't just old. It wasn't just worn. It seemed to echo inside our very skin as if he were speaking directly within us. I wanted to pull her back, order everyone to return to the ship, but my legs were locked by something I couldn't name. "What do you do here?" Kellen continued. "What do all keepers do?" The old man opened his arms, the green light flickering around him. "They illuminate the path for travelers." A chill ran down my spine. If he was here to guide, where had he guided us? Then we noticed the detail we had overlooked until then. That pile of debris where he was sitting. It wasn't just scrap. It wasn't just fragments of an old station. They were bones. There was metal and fiber. Yes, parts of ships, remnants of technology, pieces of spacesuits torn and burned. But among all of it, there were skeletons. Some whole, others incomplete. All old, dry, preserved by the vacuum. and he was sitting there, atop everything, like a king, on his throne of forgotten bones. Others have come before, like you, lost, strayed, but they are always welcome, even if they arrive late. Late? What did he mean by that? Before we could ask, something changed. The tower groaned, as if it were breathing. The green light flickered faster. An impossible smell, something like ozone and burned flesh, invaded our suits, our minds. And then we heard it. Whispers. Low, sharp, as if someone was speaking right into our ears in a language we shouldn't understand, and yet we did stay. My vision blurred, my hands trembled, I tried to scream, but no sound came out, and then for a second, we were no longer there. We weren't on the rock's surface, we weren't in the void of space. We were somewhere else, a field of bodies, of shattered ships, a sky that pulsed like living flesh, red and infinite. Creatures moved in the distance, impossible shadows that seemed to crawl among the wreckage, eyeless, faceless, but watching. A tower rose at the center of that nightmare, and at its top, the green light still flickered. Then, in a blink, we were back. We were back at the beacon, but something in us had already been left behind, and up there the keeper was still smiling. I don't remember deciding to enter the tower. There was no order, no moment of choice, it just happened. Like a dream in which you see yourself doing something without ever making the decision to do it. One moment we were outside, staring at the keeper and his pile of wreckage. The next we were climbing the lighthouse's rusted staircase, our bodies moving without resistance, as if obeying a will that wasn't our own. The tower shouldn't have been standing. The metal was corroded to the bone. The floor groaned like rotten wood, and the walls were covered in symbols we didn't recognize. Marks scratched into the surface as if something had tried to claw its way out. And yet the structure remained upright, impossibly solid. And inside, time folded in on itself. The staircase stretched far beyond what the tower's height should allow. We climbed for minutes, maybe hours. The narrow corridor grew tighter, the shadows thicker. The smell of ozone and rust intensified, seeping into our suits, our skin, our bones. Then came the voices, faint at first, like an electric hum coursing through the tower's pipes. But as we ascended, they took shape. Incomplete words, sentences, that started but never finished. Murmurs in languages none of us knew yet somehow understood. There's no way out. We've come back again. How many times have we been here? The whispers weren't just coming from the walls, they were coming from inside us. And then, the names began. Our names. Kellen. She stopped climbing, trembling, her face pale beneath her helmet's visor. Darren. I felt my body tense. Geralt. We turned to the crew's engineer. His face was slick with cold sweat. The whispers knew who we were, but how? The stairs ended abruptly. No warning, no final step. Suddenly, we were standing before a door. Old, rusted, with something carved into its surface. Words scratched by hands. Long gone. Geralt ran his fingers over the writing, trying to decipher it. This doesn't make sense, but I already knew what it said. I had always known. A single phrase, repeated countless times in dozens of different languages. Every road leads back to me. I didn't want to open the door. I knew what was on the other side, but Kellen had already turned the latch. And then, the green light swallowed us. The room at the top of the lighthouse shouldn't exist. The space inside was larger than the tower itself. The walls vanished into darkness, as if there was no end. The floor was polished metal, reflecting our silhouettes, distorted, elongated, and in the center, the light, floating in the air without source, without structure, pulsing, alive. It wrapped around us like a cold embrace, and then we saw all who had come before us. Faded figures, pale faces, empty eyes, men, women, beings of species we had never encountered, all staring at us, and their mouths moved. They made no sound, but I understood them. Stay. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, but the light held us. It showed us something. It showed us the truth. And the truth was only one. We had always been coming here. When I woke, we were back on the surface of the rock. But time was wrong. The display on my suit showed an impossible date. The ship's systems flickered with records we didn't recognize. There were audio files we had never recorded, voices of ours speaking words we had never said. The only constant was the keeper. He was still there, seated atop his pile of wreckage, smiling, and the green light was still pulsing, blinking, blinking, blinking. I don't remember descending the tower. One moment we were inside, swallowed by the light. The next we were back on the asteroid's surface, standing before the keeper, before the ship. Time had jumped, a sharp cut in reality, but something was wrong. Our internal clock, that sense of time every traveler develops after years in space, was broken. I felt it in the weight of my bones, in the air that seemed denser, in the way my own thoughts blurred and tangled together. And the ship was wrong. It was where we had left it. The hatches were open, the lights still on. But as we stepped up the ramp, something felt off, as if the gravity inside was no longer the same. The corridors seemed slightly narrower. The consoles displayed information that made no sense. And then we saw the logs. The terminals showed a history of records we had never written. Messages, videos, radio transmissions. I pressed play on the first audio file. The voice that came through the speakers was mine. Avoid the light. Do not climb the tower. You cannot escape. I never recorded that. I never said those words. I looked at Kellen and Geralt. They were pale, frozen in place. The next file was a video. The screen flickered. A recording of our command cabin appeared. We were there. Kellen, Geralt, and I. Exactly as we were now. But our suits were dirty, worn. Our expressions were wrong. Then, in the video, I turned toward the camera and smiled. But it wasn't my smile. The recording distorted, my face dissolving into corrupted pixels. A shadow overtook the screen, something moving behind our reflection, something that shouldn't have been there. The video cut out. Then, the system automatically played the next file. A single radio transmission. A whisper, too faint to make out the words, but we recognized the voice. It was the keeper's voice. The ship was dying. The systems failed one by one. The energy readings flickered like a heart on the verge of stopping. The batteries were being drained by something invisible, something we could not fix. Oxygen was running low. The jump drive refused to start. We tried recalibrating the coordinates, setting a course in any direction, running. But the star map showed only a meaningless void. There were no routes. There was no out there. No matter what course we set, all calculations led back to the same point, to the green light. Then, Geralt tried to activate the thrusters manually, and that's when everything fell apart. The ship shuddered, the console erupted in sparks, and then the voices returned. But this time, they were inside the ship. The metal groaned as if it were breathing. The corridors stretched and twisted, doors slid into the wrong places. Rooms repeated themselves like a spiral nightmare. We ran for the hatch, for the exit, but the ship no longer ended. Every door led back to itself. Every corridor folded into the last. We had become part of it. And then, in the middle of the chaos, Geralt disappeared. Or rather, he was there. But he was no longer himself. He stood in the corridor staring at us with eyes that were too deep, too empty. And then he smiled, the same smile from the video. Follow any direction. But every road leads back to me. It wasn't Geralt who said it. It was the thing wearing his face. Kellen screamed. I pulled her back. The last thing I saw before we crossed the hatch was Geralt, reaching out, his fingers turning into something wrong, something too long, like shadows trying to grasp us. And then, we were outside. The vacuum of space surrounded us. The ship's ramp was still open, but Geralt never came out, or maybe he had never entered with us. We turned to the tower. The keeper was still there, still smiling, still waiting, and behind him, at the top of the tower. The light blinked, blinking, blinking, blinking. We were alone. Kellen and Geralt had stayed on the ship, or something that looked like him had. But the truth was, maybe he had never left the lighthouse. Maybe none of us had. We were back on the asteroid's surface, but now I knew that meant nothing. Time here didn't work as it should. The space around us wasn't real in the way we had learned to understand reality. And the light, the green light, never stopped blinking. Kellen clung to my arm, her eyes wide and gleaming with terror. Darren. What's happening? I wanted to tell her everything would be fine, but lies were useless here. There was no good, no evil, no logic. There was only the lighthouse, and it wanted us here. The keeper's voice tore through the silence. How many more will come? We turned. He was still sitting on his pile of wreckage, always there, always waiting. He looked at us as if we were old friends who had returned home. A tightness gripped my chest, because part of me wanted to sit there with him. What do you want? My voice came out weak, hoarse. He blinked slowly, as if I had asked a meaningless question. I am the keeper, I only guide. Guide where? Kellen spat, furious and afraid. His smile faded. He lifted a thin, bony hand and pointed upward, to the lighthouse. The light pulsed stronger now. And that was when I realized what was wrong. The pulse of the light. It was the sound of my own heartbeat. Kellen dropped to her knees, clutching her head. No, no, no. I remember. I knelt beside her. Remember what? She lifted her face, and something in her eyes no longer belonged to her. I've been here before. The memories struck like a blow. They weren't mine, but I felt them. Other crews, other voices, names I didn't recognize but somehow remembered. I saw them wandering the surface, their eyes empty, their expressions shattered. I saw their ship struggle to leave, always returning. I saw their bodies rotting beneath the green light. I saw their echoes still walking there, murmuring their own stories, their own versions of terror, trapped in a cycle with no beginning, no end. I saw Geralt, not the Geralt who came with me. Another Geralt, another me. Infinite other versions of all of us, trapped in the impossible orbit of the lighthouse. I screamed, but the sound died before it left my throat. The keeper stood up. He was taller than before. His eyes were now just black voids, bottomless, endless. He took a step forward. You understand now, don't you? The light blinked. The pulse quickened. My heart was no longer in my chest. It was in the tower. It was part of it. I was part of it. Follow any direction. His voice was inside my head now. But every road leads back to me. I grabbed Kellen's hand, and we ran. Not toward the ship, not toward any logical destination. We just ran. Ran away from the tower, away from the light, away from the voice. But the asteroid no longer ended. The horizon curved into itself. The ground stretched endlessly, repeating in a sickening loop. I turned. The lighthouse was not behind us. It was in front of us. No matter how far we ran, we were always running toward it. Kellen started laughing, a wrong laugh, and then her laugh became an echo. And then the echo became many voices, and then I realized all the voices were mine. The keeper was back in his place, sitting on his pile of bones and wreckage, as if he had never moved. As if he had always been there, he looked at me and smiled. How long has it been? The light blinked, blinking, blinking. The light blinked. My heart pulsed to the same rhythm. I no longer knew if I was the one beating in sync with the light, or if the light was beating inside me. Kellen was still beside me, but something inside her was already gone. She didn't speak anymore. She only looked at the lighthouse. I shook her, called her name, held onto her tightly, but she didn't react. Her eyes were open, but there was nothing left inside. Then, without warning, she took a step forward and started walking toward the lighthouse. Kellen, no! My voice no longer existed. The words left my lips, but they didn't spread through the air. They died before they were even born. Sound wasn't real here. Nothing was. I tried to grab her to pull her back, but when I touched her arm, she was no longer solid. My fingers passed through her as if I were trying to grasp a hologram, a projected image, a reflection of something that no longer existed. And then, she unraveled. Like dust swept away by a wind I could not feel, and all that remained was the green light. Blinking, blinking, blinking. I was alone, but that wasn't true, because I had always been here. I knelt on the asteroid's rough surface. My mind spiraled in impossible loops, folding in on itself. My ship was still there, but it was a lie. I could try to board it. I could try to flee, but I wouldn't. I already knew the answer. I had already tried before. The Keeper watched me. His smile was gentle, merciful, as if he pitied me. You understand now, don't you? I wanted to say no. I wanted to fight. I wanted to scream. But there was no battle left to fight, no resistance left within me. Because I remembered. I remembered everything. I remembered the first time I saw the light. I remembered the first time I stepped onto this rock. I remembered every time I had tried to escape. I remembered every time I had failed. I remembered the crews that came before me, their faces deformed by time, their echoes still wandering through the lighthouse's shadows, their empty eyes staring at me. And among them, I remembered myself. Other versions of me. I saw them running, screaming, dying. I saw them always returning to the same place. And I saw the Keeper, waiting for them all. Waiting for me. My body ached. Not like a living body, but like the memory of pain. Because maybe I hadn't been alive for a long time. Maybe I had never arrived here. Maybe I had always been here. I stood up, without urgency, without despair, without fear. The light pulsed, calling me, and I walked toward it. The tower opened for me. I climbed its stairs without counting the steps, because there was no finite number of steps to count. They were infinite, because the path was always the same, because the path never ended. The room at the top welcomed me like an old friend. I had been here before, and before, and before, and before. The light stood before me, pulsing, waiting. I looked at my hands, and they were no longer mine. My reflection in the metallic surface was wrong. Older, thinner, emptier. I watched my eyes turn to shadow. I watched my skin become time. I watched my voice become an echo, and then I understood. The Keeper had always been here. The Keeper had always been me, and now I would be him. Forever. The green light blinked. Blinking, blinking, and for the first time in so long, I smiled.